Hello again, welcome back. Next up, a speaker you absolutely will not want to miss. We're joined by Sarah Thuo, partner and America's practice leader for sustainability business transformation services for IBM. We're talking diversity, equity and inclusion. So a very warm welcome to Sarah to Sustainability Live New York. Sarah, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Neil. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Very good indeed. Thank you so much for joining us. We've had a fantastic day so far. I've been thoroughly looking forward to this. We've got a lot of ground to cover in the next 40 minutes or so. So if you don't mind, we will get cracking straight away. And I'm going to ask you a fantastically open question to start with. That's always a nice place to start. And for you, why is diversity, equity and inclusion just so important for you personally?
Absolutely, it's a great question. Well, I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is a set of core values that I personally hold dear because for the majority of my life, I've lived in a part of the world where I am a minority. So I'm originally Kenyan, and after spending my formative years in Africa, I went to college in North America. And since graduating, I've spent the majority of my time living and working in the US. So that makes me a Black immigrant woman working in corporate America. And, my experience is very unique, right? The people around me most times don't look like me, they don't think like me, and certainly have had very different life experiences. So I understand the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion as a person who has lived the experience of being an outsider and someone who has seen the value of infusing new ideas based on different life experiences. In sustainability, which is the field I work in, I see D&I being a core part of what we do in sustainability. First of all, based on research around this topic by organizations like McKinsey and Harvard, we know that organizations with diversity and diverse teams, especially in leadership, perform better than their industry peers. They show that organizations with diversity in their leadership drive more creativity, innovation, and that the cognitive diversity that's based on different life experiences drives a higher level of adaptability and better customer-centric solutions. So all these sound like amazing ideas and certainly the type of thinking that we need in creating solutions to the very, very big problems that we are facing in driving sustainability across the globe.
Sarah, if I can pick up on one thing you said there, it said it helps you think differently. I find that fascinating. How, in your experience, have you been able to think differently? How has that helped you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big part of cognitive diversity is based on life experiences, really, right? I was speaking recently about women in the workplace and talking about how women's life experiences give them a different level of empathy, for example, than men who might be in the same workplace based on the experiences such as, being a sister, a mother. A lot of times women are in the caregiving position. And some of the leaders that I think are really effective in leadership as women are people who lead with empathy, people who lead with trust, and are able to form relationships in an amazing way that is not typical in corporate America where I work in. And so certainly life experiences inform cognitive diversity, and the higher the level of cognitive diversity that you have in an organization, the more creative that you can be, the more adaptable that you can be. And so I think it's a great strength that can be leveraged across the board.
And that creativity and diversity of thought is obviously absolutely crucial in the field of diversity, which is why we're all here today. But for you, is DEI only relevant in the S aspect of ESG?
Yeah, well, I don't think so. Certainly not. I think it's certainly a part of the social metrics, such as dealing with the root causes of poverty, increasing access to education, increasing health access, and other metrics in the S part of ESG. But D&I should really be considered in all aspects of ESG. If I think of the environmental aspect, for example, there's a lot of inequity in how greenhouse emissions, for example, affect people in different parts of the world. And I think specifically of the global south that's bearing the brunt of a problem that is mostly caused in the global north. D&I is also a big part of the G, right? The governance part. So creating policies, controls, and procedures in sustainability certainly encompasses ensuring all stakeholders that the organization touches are heard and that the organization is mindful to ensure fairness to all stakeholders. So D&I is relevant to all aspects of ESG and should certainly be an integral part of any sustainability strategy.
Because one thing I'm doing a lot today, as people watching will have already noticed today, is I like to have things that people can take away and to make a tangible difference, maybe do differently. Would that be a big part of your advice to any sustainability leader or anyone who is building a career in that field to make sure they're linking DE and I to their ESG policies and making sure the two are intrinsically linked rather than separate things?
Absolutely. And I think most organizations understand that today, that sustainability is broad and it touches a very many aspects of how we look at what the organization does. And so D&I is certainly a big aspect of how companies and organizations in general should be thinking about sustainability. Uh, Understanding your stakeholders in a materiality assessment starts with understanding who your organization and the actions your organization has touches across the globe, right? Not just your employees or customers or suppliers, but organizations have, especially in today's world with global supply chains, organizations touch many stakeholders across the globe. So being mindful of D&I across a sustainability strategy is absolutely crucial to having an effective sustainability strategy.
Well, if we move things on slightly, for you, what role do intergenerational equity and justice play in sustainability more widely today, if any?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question for me as a millennial, especially working with a lot of Gen Zers who are in my team. I think, intergenerational equity is certainly at the core of the definition of sustainability, right? So I think back to the World Commission on Environment and Development and the definition of sustainable development that they came up with in 1987, that sustainable development is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Certainly, we know that our ability to meet the Paris Climate Agreement pledges will directly affect the quality of life of future generations. And similarly, the work that we do today on advancing social equity and justice could help future generations see some of the most prevalent social issues that we are dealing with eradicated if we do well, or unfortunately, they'll be subject to the same conflicts that we see today if we don't solve them. So that's why it's great to see young people like Greta Thunberg, Elizabeth Wathuti campaign so effectively to shed light on the intergenerational inequity issues such as climate action. And it's a call to us, to those of us who have the ability to effect change today, knowing that future generations are depending on us for a livable planet, for healthy natural environment going forward, and for better social living conditions. I think to my children and the life that I'm living, I'm leaving for them. And it propels me to do the right thing and to make sure that history looks on us with a favorable light based on what we do today.
Sticking with the theme of intergenerational equity, and for you saying that you're maybe working with a lot of Gen Zers on these sort of things, what advice would you give in trying to make sure the different generations work productively together? Because maybe some of the main decision makers may come from a different generation to the people who are trying to affect the change. How do you personally go about tackling that?
Yeah, I think really it comes from representation, right? Enabling everyone on the team to have a voice, to be heard, and to contribute. It is very fascinating where I work because we work across the board, across all generations in a large organization such as IBM. But I love the fact that the company is very focused on making sure that everyone has the ability to voice their opinions. We have very diverse teams that lead to amazing solutions. And we want everyone to participate in what we're doing. So one of the big things that we do at IBM is hackathons, where we invite folks from across the globe to contribute to solutions, digital solutions on different issues, including sustainability. And I think the variety that comes from intergenerational representation, racial representation, gender representation is a beautiful thing. And we are able to come up with amazing solutions because of the ability for everyone to get their voice heard.
Yeah, amazing solutions and better results, which is the whole point of it, really.
Absolutely.
Now, if
Absolutely.
you forgive me, can we just loop back a little bit? Because a moment ago you mentioned about the global south. Some of the greatest natural carbon sinks in the world are in that region. Do you think this is going to be an accelerator for economic growth as the carbon market grows?
Well, my hope is that it will. Although I'm a little skeptical based on some of the issues that have been prevalent in carbon markets today. So to begin with, a large portion of trading is in the voluntary carbon market, which in my opinion is really the Wild West. There are a lot of reports of exaggerated carbon capture. They're marketed and sold by companies that are mainly based in the global north. I recall one of the most heartbreaking conversations I had last year was with a representative from a country in the global south who was trying to set up a mechanism for his country to trade carbon credits. So his major challenge was that in order to set up the digital platform that was required for this, not in the voluntary market, but as a country, his country would need to borrow funds from donors in the global north. And it felt very unjust to me because this country, which is in Africa, is one of the ones that have been hardest hit by extreme weather. So the extreme weather has caused droughts in some areas, flooding in other areas. And when I think that, Africa has only contributed 3% of global GHG emissions, but to solve this problem, this representative was to go back and get financing from other countries that have been contributing to the majority of the GHG emissions. It certainly felt like a big D&I problem. I do think there's some good news on the horizon. I'm specifically very excited about the REDD+ sovereign carbon credits market, which is monitored by the UNFCCC. And I think what it does, it gives these countries and buyers of the carbon credits transparency and accountability. And I believe the ability to come up with solutions that solve complex problems like digital platforms. But overall, I think that climate finance is a complex problem for the global south, and it will need a multifaceted approach to make sure that countries with some of the largest carbon sinks in the world, which lie in the global south, will actually benefit from the carbon markets.
So I'm sure all of you watching will agree that's a fantastic example of maybe the lack of balance there is. But whilst we're talking globally or looking wider, for you, can we look at what for you would be an inclusive way of setting a climate action policy?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it starts with representation, and not just in climate action policy, but further up the chain. So I'm a supply chain practitioner, so I think of this as upstream and downstream. But if you think back to climate science and climate research, today that field is very dominated by men, mostly men in the global north. There is therefore a high risk of having a skewed view on climate science based on one part of the world. And what we need is all types of representation in these areas, including gender representation, intergenerational representation, racial representation. And I think back to COP27, which I had the opportunity to attend. One of the main issues that some of the representative of indigenous people groups were talking about and very concerned about is how climate change is really threatening their right to self-determination. So specifically, some islands in the Pacific are literally being wiped off the map because of rising sea levels. And so climate change is not some far off issue that they're concerned about. It is a real threat to their very existence. We know that indigenous people and local communities are responsible for conserving over 20% of all land on Earth. So in my view, it is really critical that their voices are not just heard, but they're integral to creating research on climate science. They're also integral to creating holistic plans to combat climate change and extreme weather patterns, and also in creating policies to ensure a sustainable world for all of us. So it comes down to representation and also to making sure that all voices are heard and accounted for.
And for you, when you're in the room and you're hearing those kind of voices, even if you knew a fair amount about that issue in the first place, or are already an expert in that issue, does it make you think about things in a slightly different way when it becomes that extreme about the very existence of an island or the self-determination of a region?
It does, and I think to me it's always great to meet people right where they are. I certainly believe in integrating in the different communities where I work in and understanding what people walk through, and as much as possible to walk in their shoes. And when I see people really concerned about their livelihoods, the livelihoods of their fellow countrymen and women, it makes me concerned because it's just a matter of time, I think, before we start seeing that in the area of the world that we live in. I think back to Europe last summer, right, with the amazing drought that had never been seen before, and the year prior to that, the flooding that had never been seen before, that was normally associated with the global south. So I think the first thing is it's an eye-opener to be very empathetic with people who are living this right now. And it's also a warning sign to those of us in the global north that it's just a matter of time before these effects of extreme weather patterns caused by climate change are seen in the global north and start affecting us like they affect people in the global south today.
Staying with the global north and south theme here, there's a bit more I want to dig into on that. A lot of corporations have programs geared towards doing good in the global south. There's charitable donations, there's development projects, there's all sorts. Do you see this as a good way to advance the equity and inclusion, or is there more you think companies could be doing or maybe doing differently?
Yeah, well, I think it's certainly one of the ways corporations can work toward promoting access to funds, to education, to healthcare, to technology, and it's one of the ways to advance social equity. However, it's not the only thing, right? And we shouldn't have blinders on when we come to how to deal with the global south, or how to interact with the global south, I should say. We live in a very interconnected world. Most companies have ties to stakeholders across the globe, including in the global south. And I think back to some of the work that I've been doing with consumer packaged goods companies to create transparency in their supply chains. And for some of these companies, their raw materials come from the global south. And what I've seen some of the leading companies do in this industry is connect to that first mile in a very real way. And most importantly, connect their consumers to the first mile, to the farmers who are growing these raw materials and selling it as an input to the final consumer goods that are being sold. They've been able to build brand equity by connecting consumers, to the farmers who produce the raw materials. There was one company we worked with, for example, that's a coffee retailer. And using the scan of a barcode, the customer is able to see on their coffee cup, they're able to see the journey of the coffee beans right down to the farmer who grew them. And they're able to tip the farmer in-app, which was really cool. So there's a lot more companies can do to connect to the global south, to encourage all types of sustainability initiatives, including fair trade and environmental conservation, to incentivize things like environmental conservation in some of the companies that they deal with in the global south. So there's certainly a lot more opportunity than charitable donations and development projects. And I think leading companies are starting to do just that, to connect and to understand how to live together and work together for joint value creation.
Now that example, absolutely fantastic with the coffee cup. I absolutely love that, because whenever we talk of sustainability, and I interview so many people about it, and the elephant in the room is always greenwashing. Is always the question about whether companies are doing something purely for the kudos of doing it, for the fact they can say they have this without necessarily achieving the best results they possibly could. For you, using technology like that is now an option, like that barcode on the coffee cup, do you feel a lot of companies are really only just opening their eyes to the real difference they can make of linking that first mile to the consumer rather than just grand statements?
Absolutely. And I think companies that are doing sustainability, that view sustainability as they should, are seeing that sustainability is a real differentiator. Consumers are demanding a lot more visibility than they were in the past. Consumers are demanding that the companies that they work with, that they buy from, are good citizens, good corporate citizens. And so companies that are leading in this area really see sustainability not as a checkbox kind of exercise where they have to do something because it will give them some points in PR, but they see it as a way to connect to consumers. They see it as a way to actually look at the holistic value that they're creating, and not just based on financials, but also based on their impact in the world. And I think to a company like Patagonia and some of the good that it's doing, people buy from Patagonia because of not because not just because their clothes are great, but also because they have trust that the brand is doing a lot to make life better for everyone involved in their supply chain. And there is no perfect company, right? I think a lot of companies uh, are discouraged from starting because they're afraid of being labeled greenwashers. But all of us are in the sustainability journey, and we have to take first steps before we can get to perfection, if we can ever get to perfection. I think it's a matter of getting better and better and having better and better impact.
Now you're talking about leaders, leading company there. You work at IBM. You are leaders. You are trendsetters. You are opinion formers on a global scale. For you, what are some of the ways technology can play a role in advancing DE&I in sustainability policy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to what I always share with my clients that it's virtually impossible to make a positive sustainability impact if you haven't set goals and cannot measure how your actions affect your ESG goals, including D&I. So setting and tracking sustainability goals requires data gathering, it requires data curation, analysis from multiple data sources. And many times we find that these data sources reside in multiple systems around the company or even outside the company. So our IBM technology and our expertise helps companies gather this information. It makes the process to gather the information, curated and run analysis, automated, repeatable, auditable. And we know that companies that can articulate their ROI from their ESG efforts are also much better at being sustainable companies. And so technology can help you understand and articulate your ROI. One of the other things we're seeing in 2023 is an increase in regulations, right? So we see the upcoming SEC regulation, for example, on climate disclosures that we are expecting as early as this month. The European CSRD regulations coming up towards the latter part of this year. And so we know that we will need to have, for the first time in many places, investor grade information rather than the voluntary ESG reporting that we've done in the past. And this will bring a level of trust and a level of information that has not been in the market before. So technology will certainly play a big role in creating the ability to bring this information together and to create the processes that will be auditable and that will be investor grade, that will create the investor grade information going forward. So it's an exciting time for us, and it's an exciting time for technology and sustainability.
Well, whilst we're on the subject of technology, there was one thing, Sarah, I really wanted to bring up, and that was about artificial intelligence. It's such a sort of a hot seam of progress at the moment. It doesn't seem to be a day goes by without another significant headline. For you, AI, has it come under a lot of scrutiny historically from DE&I advocates? And what are your thoughts on it in terms of how AI has a role in DE&I?
Yeah, well, I think AI is like a lot of technologies, right? It has to be used responsibly for it to be effective. When I think of the good AI can do, I think AI can accelerate an organization's progress towards sustainability goals in general. I've seen it be used to automate slow points, help companies make smarter and better decisions with ESG constraints in mind, eliminate human error, speed up processes that can be slowed down in organizations. So it's great in areas such as energy management, smart decisions around conserving of resources, even water resources. But as I said, like any technology, it has to be used responsibly. And that's why I'm specifically proud of the work we're doing in IBM in responsible computing. So it includes bias detection in code. It includes improving access and equity in code. And we know that we certainly have a responsibility in working with powerful technologies like AI to make sure that we are using their power to advance all sustainability, including issues such as D&I. So I think a technology in general can be used for good or bad, and we certainly want to use it to do good, including advancing D&I.
Well, time is starting to run away from us a little bit. We've still got a bit to cover off. And as I was saying earlier, I am a huge fan of finding things to talk about that people can really take away and use and put to a tangible use. So it might seem a bit of a cheap question, but for you, let's talk about some easy, quick wins. The ways that organisations can improve DE&I in sustainable policy. What are some of those quick wins that you've seen and can identify?
Yeah, well, I think we covered some of this in previous questions, but certainly I think it starts with thinking about the wider range of stakeholders affected by businesses, right? And this includes suppliers, employees, customers, investors, and others. And in each of these aspects of stakeholders, there's something to think about in D&I. I see some companies, for example, when dealing with their suppliers, really focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion in their supplier base. We at IBM, for example, have 15% of our spend going through diverse suppliers, and we're part of the $1 Billion Roundtable, which is an organization that recognizes companies that have over $1 billion of spend with diverse suppliers. And so we've prioritized this as a business initiative imperative because we know that diverse suppliers, again, bring a lot of innovative solutions and enable us to meet our goals in our own supply chains. We have great D&I efforts and employee groups to enhance retention, to enhance even acquisition of talent, and to make sure that employees are heard. And then, in our customers, we have a big view on customer-centric or a big focus on customer-centric solutions with a diverse set of customers. And so companies can just, I think I like to call it, put in the green thread of D&I across everything that they do and think differently about what you're doing and think through what is the effect of an organization across its entire value chain on the different stakeholders that it touches.
I love that description of the green thread. You can really, really picture that.
Absolutely.
If I can, what I love to dig into is some of the unexpected benefits you may see. You were talking there about the effort to use sustainable partners within the supply chain. Normally when business decisions are made, you've made a decision for a set of reasons. You know what you're going to be getting from it. What I love to find out is when those decisions have been made, what are the best unexpected benefits you found from working with people you might not necessarily have worked with before?
Yeah. Well, I think for me in the work that I've done, I'm originally a supply chain practitioner, and in the work that I've done in supply chain, I think the innovation that comes from diverse suppliers is always extraordinary. And this is because many times these suppliers have had to overcome a lot of things that other suppliers haven't. So I think of small businesses, women-owned businesses, um, Black-owned businesses in North America, for example, or Indigenous-owned businesses. They bring a very unique set of capabilities that a lot of companies are not able to bring, and they bring the ability to think through problems very differently as well, especially in services. Think through services very differently. And so I think the level of innovation that's brought by D&I suppliers that are typically seen as diverse suppliers, has been something that is extraordinary in my point of view. The other thing it does is it creates competition, it increases competition. And so a lot of companies think of, I either have to choose diversity or I have to choose lower costs. And it's a false dichotomy in my view. In fact, the more you include diverse suppliers in your supply base, we find the cheaper you can buy your supplies. And so it's the ability to create economic opportunities for suppliers that are many times not part of the supply base that makes it possible for a level playing field to create competition and also to create the ability for companies to get supplies at price points that were not originally possible. And so there are a lot of different aspects I can go to in suppliers and D&I. But I certainly think it's one of the things that we've seen work really well across many different companies, across many different industries. Diverse suppliers drive innovation, they drive prices down, and they also bring a level of creativity in the value chain that is not seen in many other value chains.
It's that fresh thinking. That is invaluable. Getting on to a few final questions. We've had plenty coming in. I'm going to just pick up on a key theme that's touched on an awful lot of them, and that's how people in the audience, whether you're watching at home, in the office, wherever you are today, how they can be allies for DE&I.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it starts by making a commitment to getting educated about D&I, right? And then following through to learn more broadly about people who may not look like you, who might have very different life experiences. But I encourage you, make a friend beyond your comfort zone, right? Be more aware of how people who don't fit the mold in your organization, for example, are affected by your organization, or think through some of the stakeholders that your organization touches and how they could possibly be affected by D&I or by lack of D&I. And so I think that in general, there's a lot of research out there. There are a lot of TED Talks even on D&I. And so starting by making a commitment to educate yourself and follow through to learn more broadly about D&I think is certainly a good first step.
And another key theme that I've picked up with from a lot of our guests so far today are what are the blockers and the barriers, because it's very difficult to have a conversation about sustainability or DE&I, and people say it's not a good thing for a business. You really struggle to find that opinion, thankfully, these days. And yet sometimes it still doesn't happen. For you, what are the biggest barriers and blockers to DE&I when it comes to sustainability?
Yeah, I think that sometimes it's just not an integral part of the sustainability strategy as it should be. I think it's seen as something that, sometimes HR has to deal with, and it's at the end of the day, HR has to report on how the company is doing on D&I, or procurement initiative. We have to report on how much we are spending with diverse suppliers. And so as long as it stays a separate topic within company, within sustainability, it's really never going to work. Some of the big things, some of the biggest wins that we've seen in D&I is when there's executive sponsorship of D&I initiatives, when leadership is measured on their effectiveness in D&I, and that's a way for a company to, or any organization really, to say that D&I is a core part of how we value an organization, and we do see it as a core differentiator. And so companies that do that see the most value out of D&I, and they see the most effectiveness out of D&I. And it goes back to what I said, having it as a green thread across all sustainability initiatives is certainly the way to become more effective in D&I strategy.
And we are nearly out of time, I'm afraid, Sarah. And I will come to one final question, very much from me. And as the host, I'm allowed to do that. And that is, for anyone out there, whether they're a sustainability leader, they could be at the very top tier, it could be very early on in their career in that particular field. For you, what are the biggest single tangible things that people can do to make a difference themselves in that business space?
Yeah, I think be an ally is what I would say. If you don't belong to a D&I community where you are, certainly become an ally. Figure out what issues are of concern to diverse groups of people, and be involved. I think, as part of the global community, we certainly are becoming a lot more integrated than we have been in the past. And so it's not hard to get involved in D&I initiatives. And so I'd say, as I said before, get out of your comfort zone, get involved, join a D&I group, be an ally, and see how you can learn and how you can be more effective as you start getting involved with these people groups.
And by doing that, let's just compare finally, because we've just got a couple of moments left, where you were sort of earlier on in your career, when you were entering the corporate space compared to now. Does it excite you, the amount of change there's been, or does it concern you?
It excites me, actually. I love the new generation that's coming into the workforce, the Gen Zers that I work with, and how much more aware they are than previous generations that I've worked with on the value of D&I, on how to make sure that there's equity and inclusion in the workplace. So I think there's been a lot of work done in the past 20 years or so that has really shifted mindsets, and that is super exciting to see. There's certainly a lot of work to be done still, and we're not living in a perfect world, but I am really excited when I look at how much progress has been made, and how much especially the young generation really values D&I and sees it as a way of the future. So it is exciting for me.
Sarah, that's a lovely place to finish on, an exciting place to finish on. Thank you so much for being incredibly generous with your time, and I'm sure everyone will take plenty from that.